to the Built on Air podcast, the variety show for all things Airtable. Each episode, we cover 4 different segments. It's always fresh and different and lots of fun while you get the insider info on all things Airtable. Our hosts and guests are some of the most senior experts in the Airtable community. Join us live each week on our YouTube channel every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern and join our active community at BuiltOnAir.com/join. Before we begin, a word from our sponsor, OnToAir.com. Any business running on Airtable gets the value that Airtable has, but also needs a few more functions to complete their operations. That's where OnToAir comes in. It's a suite of tools for any business running on Airtable to maximize your operations efficiencies and automations. One customer, John, states that OnToAir enables his business to function properly without having to think about building their own software, and that is pretty invaluable. The OnToAir Airtable apps are amazing, and we use them often and are very happy with the results. So join John and hundreds more customers and take your Airtable to the next level with OnToAir. Sign up today with promo code BuiltOnAir for a 10% discount. Check them out at OnToAir.com. And now let's check out today's episode and see what we built on air. Welcome to the Built on Air podcast. This is season 15, the last episode, episode 8. We'll be off for a few weeks after this, and then we'll be back in October for season 16. So good to have everybody joining us today. We've got Camille Parks back as always. We've got Ali could not join us today, so we've got Ben Bailey coming back. Welcome, Ben. Good to have you, and we'll get into an update on Ben. Ben's been on the show, I believe, a few seasons ago, but back with us, and he's got some exciting news to share with us. So I will walk us through what we're going to be talking about today. We do an hour-long show. We talk about everything Airtable, keep you up to date. We always start with our round the bases and what's going on in the different communities, and then a quick shout-out to OnToAir, our primary sponsor. Then we will do the question that everybody's been asking, what is up with the pricing changes? Camille's going to walk us through that and help everybody understand how it impacts us. And then Ben will get an update on what's new in Ben's life and his career. And then a quick shout out to our community, how you can join it. And then Ben's going to walk us through some new functionality that will be coming and a sneak peek into that. And it's related to two-way sync version 2.0. So welcome, everybody. Good to have you. With our round the bases, there's a few things. So like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the pricing changes, but that definitely is the big topic that everybody is talking about. So we won't dive too much into that because we're going to focus a segment on it, but it's definitely, there's discussions pretty much everywhere about it. There's a long thread on the Airtable community talking about it and all the changes. I know in the Built on Air community, I think this might be, we had 150 replies to this comment on the pricing changes. I haven't kept track, but that might be one of the higher threads that we've had in the community. So definitely a lot going on. I know in the Facebook community and likely in the Airtable Forums community, everybody's talking about pricing. So we're going to go deep into it with Camille in a little bit. So hold on to that. The other thing that is kind of in conjunction with it, that we can talk more about, is some of the features that were also added in this. So yeah, I don't know. You guys might be more familiar with this. So there's some enterprise features, scalability, governance. You familiar with these changes?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, walk through what they did there.
So in place beforehand, there were certain like high level administrative controls you could have if you were on the enterprise plan, and some of the things that larger enterprises might have run into is you might have had multiple different your business was so large that it kind of made sense to have localized, versions of Airtable that had different settings applied to them. Maybe the legal department is more locked down or has fewer permissions granted to them than the finance department, or I don't know. So one of the things that was added in this batch for enterprise scale, which is the new name for the enterprise plan, is things called there's organizational units, which are kind of like sub organizations within one enterprise instance. So you can simplify your billing instead of having multiple enterprise instances and contracts with Airtable. It's one contract where each pod or organization can have slightly different settings. So there's a lot of nuance in there, and how you would implement it really depends on your organization, but that's one of the major things that they added. Airtable AI is a beta that's currently out and being tested. That's available for the Pro/Team plan, maybe also. So it's not just enterprise, but that's one of the things that's kind of lumped into the enterprise adjustments. And enterprise key management, I believe, is another one that was added for the enterprise side of the recent batches of updates. And then for everybody, it was various improvements to the timeline view yet again. So they're constantly updating that view in particular. And then, so here's the thread that's about enterprise specifically and all of the additional things that they're getting. So
yeah, I'll add one little detail. The new, what I think they call it, enterprise hub, like Slack calls it enterprise grid, and Airtable's calling it enterprise hub, with the like different layers. So you've got like your big master account and then like your org units, but they've introduced this new role for super admin. So if you're like in IT and you just need to make sure that like your SCIM, like your OAuth, not OAuth, sorry, your SSO configurations are like set, no one else can touch them. Like that's what that's for. Yeah. But then you are not an Airtable user yourself, right? You're probably administering dozens of different tools and making sure they all conform to your org's, like your company's larger security and finance concerns. And so that's like your role, and that's at that highest level. That's where those settings are set. But then within the org units, there are admins who are going to be like Airtable builders and users like us, who are actually like configuring, like, do we want our org to be able to like add these integrations? That's up to the discretion of like those admins. So I like that sort of split between, you've got like your central IT, security, and finance people who control like the stuff that we don't care about. And then there's the actual like users of the product who are administering their different slices of the account, as they see fit.
Great. Yeah, very good. And did you touch on the record updates, or are you going to talk about that?
Okay, segment? So no, and I have the first of my, I'll call a complaint. It is difficult now to find how many records you can have per table. The old pricing page broke down how many records would be the max per base and the max per table. The new pricing page just says the max per base. So this is the first I'm hearing of the records per table being 250,000. So I will quickly add that to my chart, and then it's a mystery what the other maxes are. But yes, generally speaking, record limits have been increased for the enterprise, and they have been adjusted in the other plans, which we'll go over later.
Yeah. So. Okay, yeah, so that was a big increase. I know that had been in beta for a while, and hopefully they're working on even more. I was reading, I didn't have it here, but there was a thread in the Facebook community about, how they're moving to the enterprise, and they're kind of like moving upstream and kind of not putting as much emphasis on the SMB, but yet the record limits are still not, where an enterprise would want them to be. Like they need to get into the millions to really satisfy the needs of enterprise customers. And so it'll be interesting how they figure that out. It seems like a technical hurdle they got to figure out.
And one thing I just checked, because that did not seem news to me of the record limits, and I checked, and there was an Airtable blog post back in March where they list that as like a new thing of increasing those limits to those numbers. So maybe that was a beta and I just wasn't familiar with it.
Yeah.
Yes,
they announced it, but they didn't roll it out.
Yeah.
I got it.
In my comparison, which I'll go through later, I was checking against December 2022. Is there sort of midpoint between the newer Pro plan versus the older Pro plan, rather than getting through all of those minutia, going with what was current as of like a week ago. And in 2022 December, the limits for enterprise were 250,000 per base, 100,000 per table.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I know they've had this. You've likely had access to this for a while, but yeah, I think this is the final rollout. So actually, yeah, this is. There we go. Yeah. So this is actually the thread I was kind of talking about. Airtable's turning their back on non-enterprise users. Where should we move to? This is a long discussion of 142 comments. It's kind of interesting just thinking big picture about where Airtable is moving with these changes. Who's going to fill in the gap? Are we going to see a huge exodus of kind of smaller businesses leaving Airtable? And if we do, where are they going to go to? Thoughts on big picture changes from these decisions?
It really depends on what each individual, like Airtable user or business run on Airtable, really needs. Some of the changes that have gotten the most flack, and I would agree, is moving. Originally, your API calls was unlimited, and now there's a number applied to it, a maximum. And for a lot of people, they're not going to notice or care because they're not using the API in any way, shape, or form. If you don't have anything that's hooked into Make or Zapier, you don't have a software account or a website built off of Stacker or any of those portal type things, you're not even going to notice. But if you are on the opposite end, where you have like a storefront that is powered by Airtable, which requires several different API calls in order to get that to work, you may or may not notice that. I haven't really done some testing. I have some suspicions that businesses of a certain volume, which isn't going to be a small portion, I think a considerable amount of businesses run off of Airtable, are going to see that API limit. I don't know if I would be able to test that, but that is my feeling. So to me, it's more like, what are you using Airtable for? And of the features that have been limited or, shuffled around a bit, were you using them? Would you eventually have need for them? And then what are the other platforms offering? Because every platform is probably really good at something. If you've heard the name of it, someone must like it for some reason. So names that I've heard going around are NoCodeDB, which is on the screen here, API Table, C Table, SEA Table are sort of the three that are most like, and Smart Suite, the four that are most like Airtable that are being brought up in these conversations. And then there's other things that are not Airtable, but do similar things, like Coda, I wouldn't say is anything really like Airtable, but it has a database in it that you could, adjust your workflow to use. So there's that.
Anything to add, Ben, from your perspective?
I'll say I've just been waiting to see how Microsoft and Google, with their soft Airtable competitors or like relational database tools, sort of evolve, and they just have had no traction, because that's really attractive to small and medium businesses. Like, I don't want 100 tools. I pay for our Office 365 or Google, what do they call it now? Suite, I guess, Workspace, something.
Suite.
Pay for that per user, and it's just really easy to keep track of. But like Microsoft's tool is called Lists, I think, and Google's is
Tables.
Thank you. But like, they haven't gone anywhere. And so like, if they reach some level of feature parity, even with like non-interface Airtable, then I think that would be like the solution for a lot of small and medium business teams. But I just haven't seen them actually move that way. Now that said, like Microsoft is throwing a lot of weight behind Loop. Maybe that is like a bridge to like a better, more Airtable-like experience, but I have no idea.
Yeah, the Microsoft competitor, I haven't checked it in a year plus, but it was nowhere near ready for usage.
It was awful.
That was my assessment of a lot of like, for whatever reason, all of the companies I would expect to look like a product from, Microsoft's alternative, Google's alternative, JotForm's alternative, Zapier's alternative, all of those were just not, they weren't even close.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of,
go ahead. I was going to say Zapier tables is like that thing you're like, oh, this would have a lot of promise if this were several years ago. I just don't know how they close that gap.
Yeah.
So they kind of started with like real bare bones that does it with what Airtable could do at the time. It felt like, why would I ever move to that system? Whereas some other ones that are like purpose built, they don't have 1,000 products in their catalog. They only have built NoCodeDB, or they've only built API table. Or Smart Suite. Those are the ones that feel the most, they have the most feature parity. They seem more stable. They're not in in the workshop or in dev or in open beta. They're released and people are using them with accessible APIs and all of those. Those feel like the more likely transition points, at least at this time. If you're looking to move out of Airtable into something else, it's probably going to be in that realm.
Yeah, I think Smart Suite is definitely nipping at their tail as far as trying to be feature comparable and in some ways better. So they seem to be taking a lot of the SMB space, or at least making a dent there. On the enterprise, I would probably say, I think Google Tables is probably the most promising if you're already in the Google world, more so than the Microsoft product. We'll see if they actually make that part of the Google Work Suite line of products, which I think is the plan. But yeah, until then, it won't get a ton of adoption. All right, let me throw some comments out here. People are suggesting other ones. Base row. Yeah. Jen says SMB will need to go to the business tier or get more specific tools. Mentions Butter, CMS, more tools specific to yours instead of duct taping them. JotForm is so buggy, but it's not truly a database. So
I think that's another good point. Airtable is like, if you want just a database with, a bajillion records that you could put in Firebase or SQL, or, those are like established platforms that many, 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 many large businesses run off of because they just need a database. If you need a database with a nice graphic interface for you to add records and do all of that kind of stuff, but not necessarily a website or a front end, then things like API table and base row they have similar looks and feels to them as Airtable. So you're not going to have as hard of a time moving over. Same thing with Smart Suite. It's going to look fairly similar and there's going to be a lot of feature parity there. If you need a database, a nice graphic interface for entering data, and also some kind of front end, that's when you're going to run into a little bit more trouble having a solution that's all in one, because Airtable has started with Interface Designer, which is still pretty basic as compared to something like, I don't know, Softer or Glide, where you can have a much more flexible design experience. But these are the things that you're going to want to think of, like, what are all the pieces that I need and which of these platforms is going to be the best fit for all or most of those before you move over. Because, Airtable is fairly specialized in what it does, and its competitors are going to be better at some, but not necessarily better at all. So you may need a couple of tools together, but you also might save money that way. It really depends on which ones you pick, because some of the options that we've mentioned are open source, so they don't cost anything.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a great discussion for another time, not today, but like how, for people who know a lot more about like open source communities, over what time scale could we expect like a true one-to-one feature parity, like with some lag, Airtable open source project to like develop? Because I think that'd be super powerful. Like, yeah, throw a small like node network in your house and you self-host your own little Airtable alternative. Like that'd be incredible for so many different projects.
I think if you ignore interface designer, I think that probably exists.
And automations.
Well, some of them have automations in there. I want to test API table because it was recommended in our BuiltOnAir Slack community. And I was looking at it and it seems like it's pretty dang close in terms of what you can do in Airtable and what you can do there. Base row I know also comes recommended. I haven't been able to test it. I don't know if they have automations, but they have similar view types. They have, similar sort of processes that you go to add new records and all of that. So I think in terms of like, when can we expect an open source alternative to Airtable that's, pretty dang close without getting into like intellectual property problems? I think we're close if we're not already there. So, maybe by next season, I'll have had time to do some comparisons, some more in-depth comparisons.
Yeah, my only fear is like as Airtable moves into the enterprise, which is great. I mean, it's great for me, for the business that I run. And we have two experts here on our show with us that work for some of the largest enterprise customers of Airtable. But most of the fun stuff that we can actually share on the show and the community people that are sharing stuff usually are kind of the creators, SMBs. And so that's the part I hope we don't lose, because there's a lot of community of freelance or small business users and creators that use Airtable, that if we lose that, we'll lose that dynamic community aspect.
Absolutely. I mean, I like working for Apple. I've done a lot of projects that are really challenging and really fun to sort of ship off and complete, but going to things like the Airtable conference earlier this year and hearing how other people are just building, regular businesses off of Airtable and the stuff that they're able to do without being developers themselves. I am technically speaking a developer now, but like all of the people who just sort of, I run a real estate business, I need a tool, and setting it up themselves, that's really powerful. And, it would be such a shame if that kind of vibe that Airtable gives people sort of falls by the wayside in favor of, more like enterprise focus, which feels hypocritical for me to say as I sit in an Apple office.
Your ivory tower.
Yeah, look at all this white.
Yeah. Jen says there's room for everyone. It's just a perspective shift for SMBs. If it adds values, it's worth the subscription hike.
I would agree. I mean, there's the whole point of, if you're running your business off of any of these tools, it's going to be a business expense, right? A perfect solution is not going to come for cheap. Even the open source alternatives, it's going to take some man hours to set it up and make sure it's hooked in correctly. And there's going to be more stuff on the front end of that to make sure it all runs correctly. But if you're just starting out, if you need to do that prototyping of your system, Airtable was really great for rapid prototyping. And if the shifting of features around in this pricing change makes that cost prohibitive, that would be sort of a shame.
Yeah, I'll end with, you mentioned Airtable. Our friend Chris Dancy, he put, I didn't link to it. I can't remember if it was in their community on Facebook or it might have been on Reddit. Kind of an open letter to Airtable, kind of speaking on that hopefully they don't lose sight of of those people that helped create it, and also supporting. There's on several communities, people continue to say that they are not getting a response and they're an enterprise customer and whatnot. So there's an open letter out there from Chris that is worth a read. We'll see if anybody at Airtable picks up on that. And a couple comments. Jen, I have clients of any size who are just blown away how easy it is to get stuff stood up. Amir, welcome, Amir. I think there needs to be a balance between falling in love with the product and being careful of getting locked into a product. Very valid.
Yes. There should always be, in any system that you build, there should be an escape hatch, just in case. Because
especially if your business is built off of it.
Right. Yeah. If their servers catch on fire, you need to be able to have an export of all of your stuff, just in case. So, it's important to back up your data. And I'm sure Dan might have a plug about that.
That's right. Speaking of which, OntoAir. OntoAir is our primary sponsor and is now focused on backups for that specific use case. Best practice is to have your data backed up on more than one place. And for today's show, I'm going to highlight one of our articles that we have, the Essential Guide to Backups for Your Airtable Base. This guide walks us through, definitely worth bookmarking. Keep it in case you need it. Hopefully you never need it, but if you do, here is the ultimate guide on how you might go about backing up your data, different ways that you can do it. Obviously, our recommended way is to use OntoAir, but that's not the only way you can do it. So if you are exploring Airtable, if you're using it, like was mentioned, core to your business, you got to make sure that you're backing up your data outside of Airtable. Airtable obviously backs it up themselves, but best practice is to have that data stored outside of Airtable for worst case scenarios. So check out OntoAir, ontoair.com, and use our backups for your Airtable data. Okay, moving on. The question that everybody has been asking, what is up with the pricing changes? What does it mean for us? Camille has your answers. There you go.
All right. So we are currently looking at the Airtable pricing page as of today, which of course is going to list out all of the features. And I say all of the features, that's actually not true. For certain features, you have to really dig for a particular answer. That's kind of always been the case with Airtable's pricing. There are specific limits that aren't really called out here, maybe because they're too minute to put on the pricing page. If you have no idea what Airtable is, you're not going to know what that limit is. But, you can get all of the specific information about what is available per pricing just now by going to airtable.com/pricing. However, if you want a comparison of what these plans used to be, I've made an Airtable base, of course, that does its best to compare like to like. So I have all of the features as they were in 2022. Again, for me, I did a snapshot of December, I think 30th or so, 2022, and then what they are all today as of August 29th, 2023. So when I say like to like, some of it was easy, free plan and free plan. Some of it was somewhat easy, pro plan to team plan, but then there's the removal of the plus plan and the addition of the business plan. And so basically, what used to be pro and is now team, you're going to be shuttled either into that or out of that, depending on what side of the spectrum you're on in terms of how many records you need or how many automation runs, et cetera. So walking through each comparison at a high level, a lot of features are the same, but some of them are different and some of those are pretty critical differences. So comparing free 2022 to free 2023, first things first, you're losing 200 records per base. That's not a whole lot of records, but it is a whole lot of records proportionally to how many you used to be able to have in the first place. So 1,200 was a weird number to me. 1,000 makes more sense. However, it's fewer records, so that's a negative. Just as a note, if it's a change that I personally feel is a negative, it's going to be color-coded red. If it's a change that is going to be a positive for most people, it's going to be color-coded green. I don't know how many records per table it is. I suspect also 1,000, but I didn't see that number anywhere. So I can't verify that is true. Free plan works a little bit differently from the other plans in that there's a specific number of editors you can have in the workspace and the specific number of commenters. The editors is the same number, 5. Commenters went from unlimited to 50. So this is one of the first examples of some feature going from unlimited to a hard number that you can't go above. Attachment space is cut in half from 2 gigabytes to 1 gigabyte. And then a lot of the rest of the features are the same until you get to extensions. So the history of extensions with the free plan is a nice storied adventure. Originally,
someday Bill will write a book on it.
Yeah, long story short, back when the scripting extension was made available, it was available for everybody. And then there was a pricing plan change that locked extensions down to the pro plan. And there was this whole back and forth about whether or not that would include the scripting extension. And as of December 2022, you could have the scripting extension and one of any other type of extension within your base if you were on the pre-plan. As of today, you can't have either, which means, my longstanding bet about the subject with Bill, unfortunately, it means that my bet was accurate, although I was, 3 decisions early, I guess. I don't know. Airtable has bought me the second sandwich. So, I've been made good on that particular bet. This saddens me, though. I think this is deeply unfortunate. Scripting is a do-it-yourself solution. I want to be able to make my base good, and even though I'm on the free plan and I'm already pretty limited with the number of records, again, for the purposes of rapid prototyping, I think it's pretty important for all plan levels to have the scripting extension.
Yeah, it's also weird because the scripting extension runs on your local machine. So there's no added cost for Airtable.
There sure isn't. There sure isn't. I don't know why.
There is if you're performing updates.
Oh, fair enough.
Yes, but at the same time, I don't like this change. I'll leave it there. So automation integrations have also been cut. You used to be able to have them, and now doesn't seem that you can. You also can't sync anymore. You used to be able to have at least one synced, or at most one synced table. You can no longer have any synced tables, it seems. And then the last one, API calls going from unlimited to 1,000 per month. I believe that is still at the workspace level, so not per base. That's fairly significant. I have no idea if the average person on the free plan will hit this number. I don't suspect, just because you're already so limited in the number of records. I don't imagine there's many API calls you would make, although I don't know if that's true, and it might not be true for your use case. So just keep that in mind, that you now have a limit for your API calls. Those are the high-level changes for the free plans. The next one is going from plus to team.
Maybe don't spend too much time on this one. I don't know how many plus users there are here, but
I'm not going to spend much time on it. I will say that if you were on the plus plan, that plan is being eliminated. You will be moved to the team plan, and you will be paying the same amount you used to pay. So you basically get all of team for half the price. So basically everything is a positive for you. Now from pro to team, these are the most like plans together. Most of the changes are going to be negative. So originally you used to be able to have unlimited extensions, and then it was limited to 10 per base. And now you're no longer, you no longer have that arbitrary limit. So it got better, and that's a positive. I mislabeled that. But things like automation runs have been cut in half from 50,000 to 25,000. It is unclear if you are able to have certain automation integrations like Jira. I wasn't able to tell that from the comparison of the different pricing pages. It might be hidden in support articles. Multi-source syncing is not available, and neither are premium sync integrations, which is kind of why I feel like you might not have the premium automation integrations either, because it would be, going essentially to the same place, either Jira Cloud or Jira, the Jira server, I think it's called. A lot of these are the same. API calls, again, are limited from unlimited to 100,000 per month. That, again, it really depends on what your use case is, whether or not this is going to be something that you notice. I am thinking if you run like an e-commerce store of some sort off of Airtable, you're probably going to see this. If you have a less intense sort of front end built on Airtable, you might not. I think this is the change that would be most worrisome, I think. And then something that I also noticed, email support is not included under team plan anymore. I thought that was odd. You get less support.
So what kind of support?
Yeah, I just, it used to be there and now it's not. So it's
maybe that's just a typo. Like email support is the only kind of support they offer anyway.
Yeah, I would hope, but it didn't have, the other ones had a check. So just flagging that. Now from pro to business is a net new plan. Before it used to be one type of enterprise. Business is basically enterprise light. So for a lot of these positives, keep in mind that you will be paying more if you're going from what used to be pro into what is now business. This is so to kind of compare the, hard limits that are given. So if a limit was introduced into the team plan that you're worried about, you might be better suited now for the business plan, which again costs more, but you will be less limited for things like the number of records per base and attachments and how long you could keep the automation history and the revision history for, like deleting records and things like that. You would be able to get all the extensions, et cetera, all of the automation runs per month, et cetera. Basically, all of the hard limits, the numerical limits are increased from pro to business, as they probably should be. The business plan is where you're going to be able to do the more complicated sync integrations, like two-way sync. And also the business plan is where you would be able to use the sync API, whereas the Teams plan cannot. So it's another change I personally dislike. I really like using the sync API, but you would now have to be on the business plan in order to use it. And then because it's business or enterprise light, or as I like to call it for business, you get some of the enterprise level controls. So the admin panel and user groups and SSO and things like that, that you could do at this level without getting to the full enterprise plan. And then you're just, you get to keep the unlimited API calls per month. So if that was a concern for you, business plan might be the plan to go for. You don't have access to the enterprise API. The enterprise API is, lets you do more nitty gritty stuff from a coding perspective, like moving people between groups, I think is like a specific example of things that are relegated to the enterprise API versus the more low level web API. And then lastly, enterprise 2022 to enterprise scale 2023. Most of this is net new features, things that didn't exist at all. And then, they were added for enterprise scale. And then some of it are things that we talked about earlier, like the increased records per base. And then you get a little bit longer revision and snapshot history. The rest of the changes are mostly things that didn't really exist, like the verified data sets. And then a lot of it is going to be under the admin controls that would be both enterprise hub and organizational units, which we talked about at the top of the show. And those are the kind of like the high level touch points of what has changed from plan to plan. And then, just going back to all of them together. The pricing is effectively the same for if you were on Pro and going to Team, it's going to be the same, numerical value in terms of your price. Business is the new plan that didn't exist before. So that's if you pay by year, it's $540 a year. If you pay by month, it's $54 per seat per month. And I think that's the only real difference in pricing because it's a new plan. Enterprise, I cannot tell you if you're going to pay more or less because it's nebulous. They never really release with a lot of detail how much enterprise actually costs.
Yeah. This is awesome, Camille. You could sell this to Airtable, I would think.
I just feel like this should be.
Yeah.
Can
you share this space with the community?
Yeah, I could probably put it on the universe and just leave it there. I didn't finish putting in all of the descriptions for what each of these features are because it's kind of annoying to get to. And the pricing table has changed. Like some items used to be on the pricing table and are no longer there, which means it's harder to find what this description of each of these features are. That's why I have the records per table for all of the old plans, but not for any of the new plans, except for the one we discovered a second ago for enterprise. So not completely filled in, but filled in to the best of my ability.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. It'll be interesting to keep this update over the years and see how their pricing changes.
Yeah, in 2024, if they make more adjustments, hopefully that's just increasing the record limit and not, shuffling who gets to use extensions and whether or not you can write your own syncing integration.
When's the last time Airtable had a pricing and plan change, like a significant one?
Top of 2023, I think.
Really? Is that recent? I just don't remember.
Well, no, not 2023. I'm sorry, 2022, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
I believe it was like February or so, 2022. That was the change that, you could only have 10 extensions per base if you were on the Pro plan, which is probably the most baffling pricing change that I think I've seen. The other ones are like, I get it. I don't like them, but I understand why from like a business perspective and, trying to make profits and whatnot. That change, I, to this day, have openly described as like just ridiculous.
Yep. Looks like Dan is having some technical difficulties.
Whoops. Well.
Oh, well. Yeah, so I'd be very interested to see because there's a very significant consumer mindset gap between a free plan and then the next step up is $20 per user per month. That's a very large gap. So I would wager that Airtable will probably at some point. I have no insider information. This is purely speculation. Just knowing what other, even business tools, having like a get your foot in the door as like an independent creator or an independent like business person. I would suspect at some point they're going to have like an entry level around $10 a month something with like hard limits on it. Sure, like only up to 5 users or something. But
Well,
$20 a month is a pretty big leap.
They did have that with the Plus plan, but they basically were like nobody ever used it. So that's why they just flat out removed it as a plan. So, and it could be that the combination of features that were available in Plus just weren't enticing enough to people, and that maybe you could get, well, and before, when there weren't any API limitations, you could have collaboration through third parties and not have to pay an Airtable license fee for every individual who needed to touch the data in some way. And now you kind of have to do a balancing act of how many people are going to be editing directly within Airtable. That's a seat that I have to pay a license fee for. And how many people need to edit externally through a portal or a website or e-commerce store or something like that. That's going to rely on API integration. And now you have a limit if you're on the team plan. You don't have a limit if you're on business, but business costs more. And so you really do have to look at the specifics of each of these plans and really ask yourself, am I going to use this feature? Do I need an admin hub? You might not, or you might actually need it. I mean, one of the biggest baffling things with Airtable is that many people were trying to get on the enterprise plan and got radio silence. Business plan, you're supposed to be able to sign up for the same way you would with Teams, with no interaction with the sales team. So, that eliminates whatever hurdle there was before. But again, it does cost more money. So really checking each of these plans and which one is the best suited for what your team or what your business actually needs.
Can you guys hear me now?
Sure can.
Yes.
All right. I kicked something under the table and I think I lost my audio and everything. So, all right. Thank you, Camille, for walking us through those changes. We're going to move on. And Ben, if you want to, I want to make sure we give enough time for your exciting news that you're going to share with us. So maybe just a brief update on what's new in your life, your new role at Adobe.
Sure. So last time I was on Dan, you said it was February of last year or something like that.
Yep.
So I think we had just, gone through my dates are crazy. We had only recently started to be acquired by Adobe. Maybe it was the year prior. But this past summer of 22, I had just come back from paternity leave, and we have a team that does research. And I was an editor for 10 years. Frame.io, if you don't know, is a tool that lets video creation teams collaborate from anywhere in the world. We were acquired by Adobe. Adobe obviously has a lot of tools that work with creative workflows, but we have a team that does research on how our customers solve their problems in the real world with real tools and real productions and all these things. And I was like, hey, I was an editor for a long time. That sounds really interesting. So they had a need to figure out, how do we pipe all of this data around? That could be insights from a customer interview to a product manager's design, or a design team's designs, product manager's strategic insight. How do we pipe all that around? Well, I had a lot of experience having worked with Airtable for 4 years prior, 5 years now, and just said, hey, I think you could do it this way. And I joined the user insights team, from my user insights. It's a lot of fun. It's great to be able to meet with really smart, creative people all day long from the industry and learn from them, and then build cool solutions with Airtable to help us all, kick really hard and make a dent in the universe. Because tiny little product decisions impact, as we're all learning now, can impact lots and lots of people. So we want to make sure that when we're making those changes or making improvements, that it's making people's lives better. So that's my new role. But a big part of that is using Airtable. And so Airtable is used across Adobe for lots of things, but at Frame.io, we use it for a whole list of things. What we are using it in User Insights for is this research repository and all of the various components that go into that. So we're going to capture data analyze it, organize it, and then pipe it back out across various tendrils to different teams. Well, like I said, I've been using Airtable for a long time, and one of the key compromises that we as builders have had to just sort of live with for a long time is like where your data lives dictates entirely what you can do with it. So in the old days, let's go say like pre-2020 or 21, whenever it was, data lived in a base. And the only way to really get out of it was to like use Zapier to like kind of move things around, but you couldn't really do a whole lot with that. And then at some point they like tested with the sync block, which I only vaguely remember how it worked, but basically it would like take a snapshot of the data in one base and like dump it somewhere else. And that like kind of helped in that you could have data live in multiple bases, but then make its way from one place to another in kind of an automated way. And then they bring out multi-base sync, the idea that you can have a share view or a share link from one table and create with a little lightning bolt a synced table in another base. Oh, that was amazing. Suddenly you could reference data from one base even though it lived somewhere else. So we're starting to narrow the like distance between data, but there were still limits. Like you couldn't update that data, you couldn't edit it from a destination, you still needed to go back to the source. If you actually wanted to interact with the data in any way other than just like I can read it right here and I can make a linked relationship in the destination even though it lives somewhere else, you had to go back to the source. And then they bring out two-way sync, and oh, amazing, suddenly you can have data live in different places, but it can sync right in front of you in this table and you can even edit it. That's fantastic. But I'm sure you can guess there's like one extra piece that's missing, and it's the ability to be able to create and delete records from a source even though you're not there, you're in a destination. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. So two-way sync is, I've been beta testing it since last year. It's really exciting, it's very cool, but the number one blocker I saw from day one was like, we have to have the ability to like create this new data and interact with it from a destination into the source. So Airtable's working on this right now. I've been beta testing it for a long time, so they were comfortable. They gave me the blessing to talk about it today. I don't know timelines, like I don't have a mock-up or anything, but I made my own, so hopefully we'll have time to show that off. Yeah. But the TLDR version of this is, I think that two-way sync with the ability to, and they don't have a catchy name for this yet, so we'll just call it like full two-way sync or two-way sync 2.0. I think the value proposition here is that it really will allow this like total interface, Airtable interface, like user experience, where if you want to build something, the analogy I've been using is like Legos. If I want to build something in Legos, I don't think, well, I need to like learn how injection molding and plastics work and then like come up with a hyper mathematical system of like how all of the little nubbins fit together. No, I just want to build a pirate ship, and I've got a box of Lego pieces and I'm like imagining this thing and I put it together. Well, in its current iteration, if you want to build something with data that your organization already has, let's say it lives in like 2 or 3 different bases, or you don't have a base at all, you've got to build that base first. You've got to figure out that mathematical system of how all the pieces fit together, and then you can build your pirate ship or your castle or your whatever. With two-way sync and the ability, like full two-way sync, and create records from wherever, well then like suddenly it doesn't matter where the data lives. And then you can have nerds like me whose whole job is designing the Lego pieces. And then you want to make a new interface, and then you can just sync in data from wherever you want. And let's say you've got like a table somewhere for like accounts or like sales deals or tasks or projects or whatever you want. You don't have to worry so much about like, how is this table built? I just want to reference it. I just want to reference it and bring it in. And if I need to add things to that list, I don't have to come up with some crazy Rube Goldberg machine to like automatically create new records in that source when I like tick a box. It's just going to interact with it like any other record that would be in the interface / the base that you're working in. So I see this as opening the door to sort of like this true interface only user experience, and then frees up people like me to focus on the building the pieces. So you'll have like the stratification between like people who are not building the pieces, they just want to build cool stuff in Airtable, and then the people who can focus on, we need to build really robust data hierarchies across our entire org where like we can actually centralize our data and we can actually have that single source of truth. Yeah, so that's the long and short of it. And like real databases, I say real databases, Airtable's a real database. Sorry, older applications that are not SaaS programs. like have this ability to like reference data and create it in like master tables and stuff. But I think it's a really important thing for Airtable, and seeing the pricing changes like this will mostly, because two-way sync is limited to business plan and above, this will be something that mostly influences people who are using Airtable for like commerce. But if you're a consultant and you're building for like major enterprises now, I do think this is going to change the way that we build, because that compromise, like I said, of like where does the data live matters a whole lot less. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick and sort of walk through a very easy example. Yes.
While you're doing that, I'm going to give a quick plug to join our community, where amazing people are in there talking about stuff like this every day. So join us at builtonair.com/join. And we're now talking about the two-way sync with Ben. And there you go. Your screen's up.
Yeah. And so an illustration of like, why does this really matter? So here we have a very simple base. I've seen a lot of orgs adopt like this exact thing, if not some like equivalent. This is project management type base, but this could apply to anything. You start with Airtable and you build a base and you put all your stuff in it. That's great. Cool. You have fairly simple data hierarchy here. Loading. All right. And we've just got, we've got projects, and we've got tasks, and we've got deliverables, things we want to produce. Cool. Awesome. Fairly simple hierarchy. Makes a lot of sense. You can do anything you need with just this right here. But as people start to work and actually use the system, they realize like, oh, like this is a little more complicated than like our work. It's a little more complicated than this simple representation, because like while we are tracking all of our deliverables in one place, webinars are super different from emails, which are super different from presentations, social and blog and all that stuff, right? So unless we just want to have a ton of fields that are really only specific to certain flavors of record, well, we should really break this out into different tables, because like these all map up to this higher entity of like deliverable, but as units, they are different themselves. So like, sort of the next generation that I have seen often is that people will break out the different like subunits into their own tables. So you got videos and maybe I should have loaded this beforehand. There we go. We got videos and stills and webinars and everything together. These are all deliverables, but they exist in their own tables. And that means you can customize them as much as you want and have a ton of different, formulas and fields or even scripts and automations that are only relevant to that specific table. Fantastic, but new problem. Now you have a data hierarchy that is a lot messier, because you've got a bunch of different sub-entities that are mapping to like the highest level entity here, the project, as individual things. And there's no good way to sort of like have all of it represented as a deliverable. Well, this is where two-way sync comes in, right? You can have a base where you now have a single creative deliverables table, but through two-way sync, right? These all exist as their own tables, or sorry, their own bases, and you're just syncing them. You're consolidating them right to this single synced table here. Fantastic, and you can even edit them from your destination, even though they live in the source. That's great. What's the limiting factor? If I want to create a new whatever, I can't do it here. I have to go back. We have to either have like a complicated system where we have an automation that fires in one place and does something else and blah, 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 just to like generate this new thing. Or we have to just like limit our ability to do workflows and say like, well, just like if you want to do this action, you have to go somewhere else, which is like dumb, but also it can just slow teams down, or it can create these artificial barriers in ways of like, well, we don't create like that type of record. That has to be that team. And that's, I don't think, a very good lesson in a lot of cases. It could be like, maybe you want to limit the ability to only create certain types of records to certain people, but that shouldn't be an inherent limitation. It should be something you implement yourself. So with two-way sync and the ability to like actually create records in a source from a destination, I don't know what it looked like exactly, but I'm going to imagine like in an interface, just like we now have the ability to customize the ability for, let me get a list view real quick. Let's drop something on here. So with the new list views, the consolidated views, you can say if you want like inline edit permission, inline creation permission, and like all of those things. So I'd imagine that you'll have like a button here for, not edit, create, like you'd be able to create, and even though it's coming from a new source, maybe apply like a record template or like the default options like you can now with the form views. And that's going to be really powerful because like in combination with like the buttons that we can now get at the top, you could be like, I want to create a new blog post in this example, or still request or whatever. So that's going to populate a new record in that new base, even though you're staying in one place. I could go on and on to talk about this in any detail. I do feel like we had to rush it just a little bit, but the basic premise here, the analogy that I think is helpful is that Lego analogy of you're going to be able to design pieces, publish them like to your workspace, and then people can use those to build whatever they want without having to understand the data in the same way and take a step down. An important piece to this that I guess I did not bring up was that with the updates to two-way sync, it's going to also mean that more field types are supported. One they've talked about specifically is that if you have a synced view somewhere, that linked record relationships will come over. You're not going to have to do that crazy thing now where you have to like, oh, it turns into just a simple text string and then I sync over the second table and then I change the field type. No, that'll just like come over all together. So you could do lookups without having to do all of the crazy like mumbo jumbo that you need to. That's really important. And of course, automations will be able to address that as well. So this is why I'm really excited about it. It's going to fix like so many problems with a bunch of the builds that I currently have that have like ridiculous amounts of complexity just to accomplish simple things. But yeah, that's why I'm really excited. I don't have timelines to tell anyone because I certainly don't know. Airtable doesn't tell me those things. I just get to beta test it when it's ready. So yeah, that's what we can all look forward to, and can't wait for it to really allow us to build way cooler stuff.
A couple questions I had. So this really works if you have multi-source syncing into one table, right? That's kind of the use case where you talked about where you can actually create that original source in that destination table. Mm-hmm. And then is this any different than the verified data component that's supposedly in beta still?
Yeah, so I guess I don't have entirely a good idea of how they differ or what I can talk about, but they do seem to be like closely aligned.
I can explain. So a verified data set is basically exactly like all other syncs, except for what it does is it surfaces. If you click add or import at the top, pretend like you're making a new table. And then right now from data library are like, you would basically pick of all of your synced tables that you've already set up. Here's one that is, all of my projects are going to need this, or, I need to reuse this same synced table 1,000 times. So rather than me finding that link 1,000 times, it just sort of surfaces it as like, hey, you're going to use this. Here it is. And it also allows you at an enterprise scale to say, okay, only the marketing team really needs this as a verified data set. And the sales team needs their own separate set of things that they're constantly syncing back and forth, so you can separate them out. So anything that you could do with any sync, you can also do with the data library, probably. These adjustments to syncing just sort of makes it much easier to edit from within the target base. It almost feels like the relationship where you have the source and the target is being changed so that they're more blended, because you could do everything in the source base now and few things in the target base. It sounds like you'll be able to do much of the same things in both.
Yeah, because you can totally imagine a scenario in which like a verified data set, like a master list of accounts that's like syncing from Salesforce or somewhere. Like obviously you don't want users to be able to like change that. Right. You need to go to your system of record for that. So this is the list, look at it, but like don't edit anything. Mm-hmm. But there are lots of times where like you do want to be able to edit that. So yeah, the opportunities are going to grow, I think, pretty significantly for how we sort of finagle our grander account structure to be a lot more coherent and get rid of like silos. Hopefully just like get rid of like, oh, well, that data lives there and this data lives here. They don't really talk to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that ability to create, and then it'll know the mapping on the back end of, because it'll be named differently on your destination, but it'll know, where to map back to when you create it on the destination. That's interesting.
I would love a field, we have created by and last edited by. I want to like created in field. Like there's the sync source field will tell you like where a record came from, but like I just want to make sure that when we're able to add records from within a target base, we also get to know like this is the record it was created in as well, just to I might treat it differently in automations based on that value.
Yeah, I was trying to find it. I was like, where the heck is it? It's because I renamed it.
Yes, your sync source field is called asset type.
And right on top of that, I would love a base schema that's not just the base, but shows like via a dotted line, where is the data coming from? Because we have is it still beta? Can I talk about this? Well, okay, I can't talk about that, but it's basically just fancier base schema. But if you could see it like an account level or a workspace level, how is all the data moving around? That would be really cool. And maybe have like layers for like, this is the actual data, and then these are the automations that live on top of the data, and then these are the interfaces that live on top of all of that. That would be super cool and would save so much time for tracking down like where the heck is this coming from?
Yeah.
Like why does it work this way?
Yeah. That's awesome. Very cool. So yeah, no timeline. I know there was a question on that. So, I mean, the fact that they haven't given it to you to beta test, that probably implies we've still got a ways to go.
Yeah.
How hard could it be? It's just replacing the lightning bolt with a plus symbol, right? Just kidding. I know it's very complicated.
Yeah. They've made several changes to sync as is for at least on the enterprise level plans. I don't know if they've trickled down to pro/team/business yet, but they're actively improving pieces of it as they go. So I don't know when adding records from a target base is going to be there, but we did recently get updating via automation and updating via an interface, which was, also deeply annoying limitations of two-way sync, which have been eliminated very recently. So, I don't know the timeline either. I imagine that, because they were able to solve those things recently, it might be, I don't know, soon. I don't want to. I refuse to give a number because I have no idea.
And obviously, I won't commit anyone to anything, but the team over there who's focusing on sync, cross-base sync, has been working on this problem for a long time, and they're thinking about it a lot, and they talk about it a lot, and they're very clever. So I think it'll, like, if I had to pick a wild number, like I hope it's here by the end of the year, because that'd be a fantastic end of year gift. But obviously, I have no idea.
Great. Thank you, Ben, for that insight and sneak peek at what's to come. Appreciate you coming on. And that concludes our season 15. So we'll be off for a few weeks through the month of September, and we'll be back online in October. We will see you then. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out our sponsor, ontoair.com, and we will see you next time on the Built on Air podcast.